The Making of a Luna. Previous episodes are available on the playlist. You can also visit our website for your favorite stories. A link is provided in the video description. Episode 8. The subject's inquiry suggests a potential decline in the partner's desire to engage with the subject, which could be indicative of a shift in their emotional or relational dynamic. He inquired, albeit in a hushed manner. However, it is evident that she was privy to his utterances. The patient's auditory capacity had been restored to its pre-intervention level. Regardless of one's personal sentiments on the matter, she found herself compelled to elevate her gaze and meet his eyes. His countenance remained inscrutable, yet she found herself perplexed by her ability to discern the subtle variations in his temperament. His ocean blue eyes bore a melancholic aspect, and his countenance, though handsome, appeared clouded with concern. It is evident that this is not the correct course of action. She expressed remorse. The subject experienced feelings of guilt because the other party's actions were characterized by benevolence, and the responsibility for the situation lay with the subject. She had clung to him, and she was also the one who had touched his lips. Upon awakening, she experienced a state of perplexity, which led to an inability to recall the sequence of events that had transpired, including the fact that it was he who initiated the act of kissing her. Then what is it? After engaging in such an act towards me? He lamented, expressing a sense of sorrow and regret. The subject experienced a profound despondency upon observing the subject's displeased and melancholic countenance. The incident was unintentional. I sincerely apologize for any perceived discourtesy. If I can rectify this error in some way? She promptly stated. The subject's personal life was not well known, due to the stringent security measures in place and the limited information available to the public regarding the monarch, with the exception of details disclosed during official visits and business engagements. It is possible that he engaged in intimate relationships with numerous women, however, it is equally plausible that he did not. Nevertheless, it is evident that he was not amenable to such a personal connection with anyone. It is reasonable to infer that he felt insulted. It is imperative to refrain from attributing this occurrence as an accident. For a first kiss to be considered an accident, it must be determined that the occurrence was unplanned and unintentional. He reiterated this sentiment, albeit with a tone that conveyed a sense of despondency, before abruptly concluding his remarks. It appeared that he had already successfully communicated his message. I sincerely apologize for this untoward incident. The experience can be described as follows. She wished to articulate accident, yet, in light of his supplication, she found herself unable to do so. In order to comprehend the implications of his actions, it is necessary to consider the potential repercussions of his decision to accept the king's initial kiss without expressing gratitude or acknowledgement. How would his actions be perceived by her? At this juncture, she was oblivious to the fact that their roles had been reversed and that it was her first kiss. I do not hold you culpable. Yesterday, my concerns were focused on your well-being, as I witnessed you staggering toward the roses. Consequently, I approached to ascertain your condition. In the moment of slumber that ensued with you in my embrace, I was apprehensive about disturbing you, and thus, I permitted you to continue your repose. I was taken aback by your abrupt departure. Should my actions have caused you any displeasure, I offer my sincerest apologies. He stated that, upon observing her, his countenance exhibited unadulterated sincerity. "No, no. The responsibility for the incident lay with me. In the event that there is any action that can be taken to rectify the situation, it will be pursued. I am genuinely committed to this objective." Elara promptly offered an apology. "There is a course of action available to you, albeit it is not of particular importance at the moment. It is not my intention to cause you discomfort." He dismissed the problem in a concise manner. "No, Your Highness, please inform me." The subject indicated that, as long as it falls within the scope of their capabilities, they possess the capacity to carry out the task. In response, she expressed her affirmation with palpable enthusiasm. She had become accustomed to providing assistance to others. She had previously undertaken numerous acts of service for her family, often without their explicit recognition of her contributions. Given His Highness's considerable contributions to her well-being, she was able to undertake the task with unwavering commitment and dedication. "For the winter ball, which is scheduled for the 20th, I would like to request your presence as my partner." Theron inquired without delay, and upon perceiving her perplexed expression, proceeded to elaborate further. "It is imperative for me to have a female partner, but unfortunately I do not have one. The issue at hand is that the ball is intended for alphas and betas, along with their respective partners. Given your designation as an alpha, you are a suitable candidate for this role. It is evident that non-participation is an acceptable outcome. It would be prudent to disregard the matter. Upon further consideration, it is evident that the subject in question exceeds the established parameters. It would be remiss to continue deliberating on the matter. I will proceed independently." Theron's countenance remained inscrutable, yet his eyes betrayed a sense of self-awareness, suggesting that his sense of pride would be subject to scrutiny. Given her disposition, particularly in light of the actions of her family, she was not amenable to pressure. "However, in the event that you choose to relinquish your insistence, it is probable that she will offer her assistance without further ado." "Very well. I hereby declare my intention to serve as your partner. Leave it to me." Elara's offer was made promptly and without hesitation. "Indeed. I would like to express my gratitude. At this juncture, I must attend to a matter of professional obligation. We will resume our discourse on the subject at a later time." Theron expressed gratitude and promptly departed, neglecting to consume his tea. His melancholic disposition underwent an immediate transformation upon hearing her response, which brightened his countenance. Furthermore, his demeanor had previously exhibited signs of composure and leisure, suggesting a state of minimal engagement. However, his subsequent departure was marked by a swiftness that indicated a potential sense of urgency or haste. The subject's behavior, which included a sudden and unexplained change in demeanor, aroused her suspicion. Additionally, the abrupt manner in which he departed was a cause for concern. This behavior appeared to be motivated by the desire to prevent her from altering her decision. She dismissed the notion, as there was no rational justification for the actions of His Highness. Consequently, the subsequent encounter would not be characterized by an atmosphere of social discomfort. In fact, it was preferable that the previous day's events be addressed. It is possible that, on a subconscious level, a faint sensation caused a flutter in the young woman's chest, as she recollected that the monarch had been the first individual with whom she had engaged in a romantic act, and that he had reciprocated. The following day, she consumed breakfast and lunch in solitude in her room, as His Highness was once again absent from the palace. Consequently, her time passed peacefully until the afternoon. The subject was engaged in an academic endeavor, namely reading literature intended to facilitate the assimilation of knowledge, when an interruption occurred. The interruption was the result of 4 domestic servants who entered the subject's workspace. Given the imminent arrival of the ball, the subjects were instructed to assist with the selection of attire and accoutrements. The domestic servants presented a wide array of styles in their attire, and despite her attempts to express contentment with the initial garment selected, they persisted in insisting upon her trying on each dress. Following a comprehensive trial of all available gowns, a consensus was reached regarding the gown that appeared most suitable. This is the one. The gown's aesthetic appeal is indisputable, and its design aligns seamlessly with the subject's physique. One of the domestic servants vociferously expressed her astonishment at the moment Elara attempted to don the final garment. In reality, the dresses had been arranged in a sequential order, with the initial dress representing the least aesthetically pleasing option and the final dress representing the most suitable option. The other maids were prompt in their agreement, and even Elara recognized that the final one was the most suitable for her. She had previously designed all of her own gowns and could discern that, despite each gown being crafted from the finest materials, the final one was the most exquisite. It is with great anticipation that I await the prospect of witnessing Miss Elara and His Highness in close proximity to one another. It is evident that they will form an aesthetically pleasing alliance. One of the maids noted this with evident enthusiasm. The image of the two of them conjured a vivid response, causing her eyes to sparkle. It is evident that the same sentiment is shared by the author, who expresses a similar level of anticipation. It is noteworthy that His Highness has historically refrained from inviting a partner to the winter ball. The aesthetic appeal of the two of them is certain to be a source of delight. It is hereby acknowledged that this is an additional instance. Indeed, the resulting images are poised to be visually resplendent. However, it would have been preferable for His Highness to have provided us with this information in a more timely manner. The store offers a limited selection of pre-made dresses. We had the option of providing Miss Elara with a custom-made gown. It was not evident that he would be accompanied by a partner this year. It was hypothesized that His Highness would attend the ball alone, as had been the case in previous years. Another maid expressed a modicum of dissatisfaction due to the temporal constraints. It is imperative to ascertain whether His Highness attended the ball unaccompanied in previous years. Elara inquired, her attention now fully engaged in the discourse between the domestic servants. Affirmative, Miss Elara. It is noteworthy that His Highness has never been observed accompanied by a female partner. You are the first one. The maids were immediately assured. It is possible that they were concerned she would become despondent if she believed the king was accustomed to having a female companion annually. The necessity of a female partner is a subject of debate. Elara inquired once more, her brow furrowed in a state of mild perplexity. Miss Elara, it is not necessary to bring a female partner. The only individuals who are obligated to attend are the alphas of the packs. The presence of companions and betas is not a prerequisite for the enjoyment of the game. In the event of non-participation by some, there is no cause for concern. as articulated by a maid who was still arranging her hair and ascertaining which style would be the most appropriate for the dress. And even if it was mandatory, who would dare to say something to the king? For an extended period, he traversed this path alone, and no one offered any commentary on the matter. The Alphas find themselves incapable of breathing in the presence of His Highness, let alone engaging in any form of discourse that might be considered detrimental to his reputation. The addition of a fourth maid was endorsed by the other three. Upon hearing their utterances, Elara experienced an exacerbation of her initial perplexity, surpassing the level of bewilderment she had felt when querying the domestic servants. Despite their departure, she remained engrossed in profound contemplation. In the absence of a mandatory requirement to bring a partner, it is perplexing why His Highness would have chosen to convey the impression that it would be problematic. After further consideration, it became evident that the subject in question was the highest-ranked werewolf, and thus, the most formidable of all werewolves. His words were considered the law, so it is difficult to fathom why he would concern himself with the opinions of others. The motivation behind his choice to portray a sense of wounded pride remains a subject of speculation. From the commencement of yesterday's dialogue until its conclusion, she reflected on the maid's statements, discerning that they had effectively dispelled her suspicions concerning his hasty departure, which occurred subsequent to her acquiescence to become his collaborator. At this moment, she was able to collect her thoughts, as she was no longer under pressure to provide an explanation for the act of kissing. The act of touching was sufficient. The discourse had been meticulously directed towards her role as his partner for the ball. It is imperative to determine whether His Highness employed a ruse to induce a sense of culpability in her, thereby ensuring her compliance with his request. In the absence of any confusion on her part or an alternative scenario, it is evident that she would not have consented. The subject of this discourse expressed a desire to avoid becoming the partner of the king, due to the undesirable attention that such a role would entail. This revelation left her incredulous. Throughout her existence, she had exhibited unwavering respect for the king of the werewolves. She had conducted extensive research on him, admiring his strength, courage, relentless pursuit of the werewolf race, fairness, and honesty. She had held him in high esteem. She had regarded him as the ideal of a person she aspired to emulate. It is noteworthy that she would not have anticipated that she would ultimately perceive his unrelenting demeanor as a form of audacity. It is imperative to note that she would have never conceived that she would come to regard the king of all werewolves as a man of integrity. The day prior to the ball was already upon us. During this period, she had encountered His Highness on several occasions during mealtimes. However, she refrained from inquiring about the motivations behind his dishonesty. In any event, irrespective of his motivations, she had consented to accompany him. Therefore, she would simply take part in the ball and subsequently request that His Highness grant her leave to return to the academy. It was evident that she was lagging in her academic pursuits. It should be noted that the subject had already undergone a process of recovery and rehabilitation, which rendered her presence superfluous and rendered the need for her continued presence moot. She perceived that if she were to extend her visit, she would inevitably misconstrue his actions. The subject had already established a relationship with another individual, therefore, it was unlikely that she would form another such relationship. However, her proximity to the king, as well as the frequency with which she encountered him, caused her to experience a state of confusion. However, the matter of informing the king and returning to the academy was postponed for a later consideration. At this juncture, she confronted a substantial obstacle that demanded her attention. Throughout her life, she had been compelled by her mother to attend formal social gatherings, known as balls, despite her lack of experience in dancing. The revelation of this fact to the domestic servants, in response to their inquiry, instilled within them a sense of purpose and motivation. They promised her that, regardless of the amount of time remaining, she would acquire the ability to perform the waltz. It is evident that she had not requested the lessons, and in fact, she had expressed her belief that dancing was not necessary for her. However, her words fell on deaf ears. Given their eagerness and amiable demeanor toward her, it proved challenging for her to persuade them to cease. At this juncture, the subject found herself in a chamber within the royal palace, awaiting the arrival of the dancing instructor. Her attire consisted of a peach maxi dress with a wavy design, accompanied by high heels, and her long hair was secured in a ponytail. It was explained to her that it would be more straightforward for her to learn how to dance in a dress, as this would ensure that she would not encounter any difficulties the following day when wearing her ballroom gown. After a brief interval of approximately 15 minutes, she became aware of auditory stimuli, which she interpreted as the sound of someone moving about in the vicinity of the door. This prompted her to promptly rise to her feet and offer a cordial salutation to her instructor. "Are you prepared for the lesson?" the king inquired with a voice that was simultaneously raspy and refined. "Your Highness?" Elara expressed surprise. The rationale behind the king's inquiry regarding her readiness remains ambiguous. The response to the inquiry regarding the prospect of instruction in the art of dance was affirmative. He stated that he was able to comprehend her thoughts by reading her mind. "There is no need to. Given your demanding schedule, I inquire as to the possibility of your offering instruction." She attempted to refuse, but he persisted. "I am not occupied at this time. I have already scheduled a dance lesson, so it would be prudent to utilize the opportunity." He responded with composure, maintaining a neutral tone of voice, yet his countenance appeared illuminated and content. She still wished to decline, as the proximity of their bodies would prove overwhelming. Furthermore, her proximity to the object of her affection instilled within her a profound sense of trepidation, as she found herself acutely aware of the imminent possibility of an overwhelming emotional response. Nevertheless, he did not leave her with a choice, as he gently held her hand and guided her to the center of the room, but not before placing his phone on the chair she had been sitting on. The phone was opened on YouTube with the song already playing. Upon arriving at the center of the room, he grasped her right hand with his left and gently placed his right hand on her waist. With both hands in contact with her body, she experienced a sensation of electric shocks throughout her body. However, she was unable to provide any indication when he was staring intently into her eyes. The subject was of above-average height, though in comparison to Theron, she appeared diminutive. He then proceeded to articulate the movements, subsequently initiating a gradual progression in accordance with the musical composition. In such close proximity to the king, enveloped in his touch and scent, she was already experiencing a state of euphoria. However, the ambience was further enhanced by the romantic song that permeated the atmosphere, contributing to an even more enigmatic and illusory sensation. The subject continued to avert her gaze, endeavoring to avoid making errors and causing him discomfort. However, it is plausible that he perceived her as attempting to avert her gaze for a different reason. Is there an issue? Am I dancing too quickly? He inquired, his tone conveying concern. The response was an unequivocal negative. She swiftly refuted the accusation, asserting that he was holding her in a tender manner and attempting to synchronize his movements with hers. This suggested that his claim of dancing swiftly was implausible. But he then made a second attempt to ascertain her condition by approaching her face. At this proximity, she endeavored to redirect his attention. It is of no consequence. The rationale behind Your Highness's selection of this particular song remains unclear. I did not consider it to be a specific composition intended for the dance form known as waltzing. She expressed self-satisfaction, attributing her success in identifying a valid rationale to her own discernment. She was unaware that her question would cause her subsequent remorse. The assertion that the song is a suitable match for the subject is based on the premise that the subject's characteristics align with the song's attributes. He proceeded with a deliberate, measured approach, making incremental, cautious movements. The question of how the song aligns with the subject's preferences or characteristics is posed. Her inquiry was characterized by a sense of perplexity, tempered by a modicum of curiosity. The following assertion is made: the heart's rhythmic contractions are attributable to the presence of the aforementioned entity, which has led to a state of insomnia. He then proceeded to utter his words in a hushed, discreet manner, positioning himself in close proximity to her ear. Her face exhibited a reddish hue upon hearing his voice at such proximity, and his utterances left her so astonished that she ceased dancing altogether. The utterance was met with a query, "What?" She finally managed to articulate her thoughts. Following the cessation of her dance, he likewise ceased his movement, yet he maintained his grip on her hands. The song. The product's dimensions and proportions are such that they are ideally suited to the user's body type. It is evident that the subject in question embodies the qualities that would cause a man to experience insomnia, as indicated by the following statement. He stated this with a slight smile on his lips and a glimmer in his eyes. The subject's state of confusion was further compounded by her innate shyness and the presence of a vivid red face. Her lips were attempting to articulate coherent verbalizations, yet they proved ineffective. The smile that appeared on the usually austere countenance did not improve her ability to concentrate. The composition referred to here is entitled "You Are the Reason," and was performed by Callum Scott. He refrained from teasing her further. Upon hearing his utterances, she finally became attentive to the ambient auditory element. Paying close attention, she finally grasped the realization that the words she had previously heard were, in fact, the lyrics to a song. She experienced a sense of embarrassment for her exaggerated emotional response, which led her to pause her movement. However, she experienced a heightened sense of embarrassment upon realizing that he regarded her as capable of causing a man to lose sleep. The woman's physical attractiveness was not a contributing factor. Throughout her life, she had never been pursued by men. The subject did not possess the type of charm that would typically result in romantic attraction from the opposite sex, nor did she possess the kind of allure that would provoke continuous nocturnal rumination. It is imperative to cease the act of provoking or taunting the individual referred to as Your Highness. After a period of hesitation, she was able to articulate her thoughts in a subdued manner. She perceived that, Subsequent to regaining consciousness following the incident, he had persistently engaged in a pattern of behavior that she interpreted as manipulative, manifested through both verbal and nonverbal actions. "I have never made light of the situation, Elara. Not even once." Theron's affirmation was accompanied by a countenance that conveyed authenticity. At that moment, she interpreted his words as an admission that he too would be besieged by restless thoughts concerning her. Consequently, she refrained from pursuing the conversation any further. Fortunately, he ceased his verbalizations and gradually resumed her dance. For the remainder of the lesson, Theron imparted her knowledge of dance to the young girl, refraining from any form of teasing. It is possible that he perceived her anxiety levels to be elevated, given her pre-existing nervousness and his absence. It is reasonable to hypothesize that if he had offered more information, she would have chosen to leave earlier. The day of the ball commenced with an early wake-up call from the domestic servants. They arrived with the intention of ensuring her engagement throughout the day, beginning with her preparation. Meals were delivered to her room in order to conserve time. The king was preoccupied with preparations for the ceremony and declined to dine with her. The onset of nightfall was imminent, accompanied by the presence of the girls in her vicinity. In the presence of the king, they maintained their silence and only offered responses when directly questioned. Despite her resemblance in personality, as she too was a quiet and expressionless person, the girls persisted in their mirth and conversation. The subject did not express any discomfort, as the act of engaging with the aforementioned individuals served to enhance her mood and alleviate some of the nervousness she was experiencing. She had initially acquiesced to the king's proposal, yet it was only then that she fully comprehended the implications of her actions. The members of the council, the alphas and betas, and all the guests were captivated by her presence, particularly given her arrival accompanied by His Highness. Previously, she had never been the object of such intense attention, as she had been characterized as a reserved individual in her previous social settings. Despite her misgivings, she had consented, and now she found herself proceeding down the stairs to greet the prince. It is possible that he perceived her presence, as he turned around and looked up. She experienced a certain degree of trepidation regarding her appearance and whether she would meet his standards as a potential partner. Her long hair had been styled in voluminous, relaxed curls that cascaded down her back, with a diminutive floral hairpin employed to secure several strands of hair. Despite the insistence of the maids, only a minimal application of natural makeup was made on her face. She aspired to blend into the background as much as possible through her application of makeup, hairstyling, and natural toned attire, given that her presence at the king's side was already sufficient. The attire selected by the domestic servants did not possess an ostentatious appearance. While the aesthetic experience was indeed pleasurable, she harbored concerns that her physical attractiveness might not meet the aesthetic standards of the genre. The shoulder dress was characterized by a champagne-hued hue, adorned with diminutive embroidered floral embellishments that spanned its entirety. In addition, the opaque material was layered with grey tulle and lace, thereby reducing the intensity of the color and achieving a more muted overall appearance. Due to her aversion to conspicuousness, the color was optimal, however, it appeared to be more suited to a princess. The object was firmly secured around the upper abdomen, and then it gradually descended, releasing itself in a series of undulating movements as it touched the ground. Upon reaching the final stage, she advanced toward him with deliberate steps. Aware of her own appearance, she refrained from making eye contact, perceiving his gaze upon her even before her descent. Fortunately, the tall gentleman in front of her, attired in a black suit with a grey handkerchief in his pocket, remained silent. He extended his hand, which she accepted with some hesitation. Despite the ball's location within the confines of the palace, the subjects were compelled to vacate their current residence and proceed by vehicle along the designated route leading to the site of the incident. According to the maids, the ballroom was located at a considerable distance from their current residence. This was due to the fact that the ballroom served as the private quarters of the monarch, and thus, it was situated in the deepest area of the palace grounds, far from the prying eyes of the public. This was also the reason why there were only a few maids, as the king preferred his privacy. Previous estimations of the number of maids present in the personal quarters had been inaccurate. Upon arriving at the ballroom, she found a group of individuals waiting in front of the door, their heads already bowed in deference. He first exited the vehicle and allowed them to elevate their heads. Then, he turned toward her, his hand grasping hers, assisting her in alighting. She inhaled deeply, maintaining a firm grip on his arm, as she mentally prepared herself for the imminent barrage of gazes from the guests. It had been more than half a year since she had last been in contact with her family, who she perceived as a loving and supportive unit. This period preceded her departure for the moonlight test. It has been more than 5 months since her return home, during which time she revealed that she had passed the test. At the time, this outcome was met with astonishment, as it contradicted the expectations of those present. It is imperative to delve into the intricacies of Elara's remarkable ability to assume the role of a watcher of the packs, a position that places her among a select few directly under the command of His Highness, the King of all werewolves. Her mother's encouragement to take the test was merely a stratagem to draw her away from the pack, thereby enabling her younger sister to usurp her mate. It was estimated that, given the time required for the training and the test itself, she would be absent from the pack for a period of 6 months. At this juncture, her sister would have already assumed the role of Luna in her stead, rendering her unable to intervene. However, a series of events led to the revelation of their true nature. The Academy had previously reduced the duration of the period. The duration of the test was reduced from 6 months to a single month. Consequently, upon her return, she found herself present for the Luna ceremony of her sister. She departed from her customary territory, anticipating an indefinite absence from her place of origin and a permanent severance from her familial connections. The loss of her mate was of little consequence to her, for her family's actions had caused her greater emotional distress. It is important to note that, at this point in the narrative, approximately 6 months have elapsed. This would have been the time frame in which the subject would have returned home, had the scheduling of the testing not been altered. At this juncture, she finds herself in a position of considerable vulnerability, holding the arm of the Werewolf King, a being of formidable power within the werewolf hierarchy. She awaited his arrival with the doorman, anticipating the moment when the grand doors of the ballroom would open and the pair would be announced. She was on the verge of reuniting with her parents, whom she had believed to be deceased. On the afternoon of the day of the ball. "Mother, I am tremendously enthused about partaking in this evening's ball. What is your opinion on the dress I procured? Does it meet the standards of glamour you have set forth?" Elara was asked, and her satisfaction and happiness were evident as she surveyed her attire. "You are a remarkable woman. The pregnancy has already reached the 6th month of gestation." The rationale behind the decision to purchase a mini dress with such pronounced cleavage, particularly the bright red hue, warrants further scrutiny. Furthermore, the potential consequences of wearing high heels, such as tripping, were discussed. The inquiry was directed towards her mother. She had initially considered accompanying her daughter on her quest to procure a dress, however, the daughter had already expressed her intention to do so independently. Had she been aware that the garment in question was the one purchased by Elara, she would have intervened to prevent its wear. However, procuring an additional one was not a viable option at that time. In fact, the situation was more straightforward in the past, when Elara was responsible for the fabrication of her garments. It was evident that she consistently demonstrated meticulous attention to detail in regard to the suitability of attire for Elara, taking into account the specific nature of the occasion. However, the youngest daughter. The inquiry posed pertains to the implications of pregnancy, specifically the duration of the gestational period, and its correlation with the physical and psychological well-being of the individual. The subject, who is 6 months pregnant, expresses a sense of indifference to this correlation, suggesting a lack of concern for the traditional parameters of pregnancy. It is imperative to maintain an appearance that is consistent with the expectations of the situation. "I am the Luna of the Silverhold pack. Some may argue that our influence is insufficient if our appearance is deemed unprofessional." Elara responded with a display of arrogance, maintaining her gaze forward and disregarding her mother's presence. "We also informed your sister to come and reject Karen properly. If one were to arrive fully adorned in such a manner, would it still elicit a sense of compassion from the individual in question?" The mother made an attempt to employ reason in her daughter's education by posing the following question. Elara's audible reaction to her mother's words was a snort. It is implausible that she would concern herself with her sister's perspective. The subject was approaching the gestational milestone of delivering the infant who would become Karen's heir. A determination was made after a thorough examination that the puppy was male. Her position was already sufficiently robust. Regardless of one's personal sentiments on the matter, it is advisable for her sister to rebuff Karen and bring the matter to a definitive conclusion. Her sister was the third individual in her and Karen's relationship. Initially, she had encountered him. It is evident that the subject failed to consider the fact that Elara was the true mate, as is customary in the werewolf society. In this context, the mate is recognized as the right partner and the first choice for another wolf. This phenomenon is particularly salient in the context of an alpha male, whose ability to procreate and establish dominion over his mate is amplified through this process. The subject indicated a preference against the relationship at that time. She departed abruptly. It is imperative to ascertain the feasibility of her intervening at this late stage. Elara inquired, her tone conveying a sense of discomposure. Despite her apparent reluctance to accept Karen, "Your father informed her that you were in the hospital in critical condition, and yet, several days later, you are present at the ball, attired in formal wear. It is hypothesized that she suspects that our objective was to deceive her into relinquishing custody of Karen." The inquiry was made by her mother. "Mother, we are scheduled to meet with the king this evening. It has been conveyed to me that His Highness is considered to be a man of considerable physical attractiveness. The question arises as to whether it is indeed necessary for me to present myself in a manner that is optimal. It is possible that a positive relationship may develop between the two parties, and the subject's assistance could potentially facilitate the dissolution of the bond between Elara and Karen. In the event that His Highness employs his alpha voice upon her, she will be compelled to articulate the rejection words, irrespective of her lack of willingness. Elara articulated her perspective as the ethical course of action in the context of the situation at hand. Elara, it is a common occurrence for His Highness to encounter werewolves on an annual basis. It is reasonable to hypothesize that he would take notice of every member of every pack. Despite the fact that the present discussion pertains to alphas, it is noteworthy that some have never had the opportunity to speak with him. Throughout my extensive attendance at formal events, I have never had the opportunity to approach him, let alone engage in conversation. The mother endeavored to dispel her daughter's juvenile aspirations. One can never be certain of the future. It is possible that he would be willing to engage in dialogue with me. Notwithstanding the possibility of his refusal, I am still inclined to abstain from any communication with Elara. It is imperative for her to relinquish her hold on Karen, irrespective of the circumstances. The question arises as to how the aunt's infant could become his stepmother. It is imperative that she develop the ability to relinquish control, whether through conscious decision or inevitable realization. The onus is not on me to address this issue. Elara's tone indicated an escalation in her emotional state, suggesting an increase in her anger. Her mother, Myrna, ceased to engage in argumentation with her. Despite her repeated attempts to reason with Elara, to persuade her to contact her sister and resolve their differences, she met with failure on every occasion. Myrna elucidated to her daughter the potential for harm that Elara could inflict upon them if she were to leverage her position. However, Elara not only disregarded her counsel but also reprimanded her by leveraging her authority as Luna, compelling her to acquiesce. Consequently, the relationship between them was strained each time Myrna mentioned Elara to her youngest daughter, and she did not want to exacerbate the situation. Eventually, Elara's mother ceased her attempts to engage in further discourse or dialogue with her. Her thoughts were focused on formulating a strategy to communicate with Elara and to initiate a process of reconciliation with her eldest daughter. She was Elara's mother, and the only one she had. Her daughter had invariably demonstrated an inclination to heed her counsel. If further discourse were to be engaged in with her, it was hypothesized that she would be more amenable to persuasion than Elara. It is evident that she had allotted a designated interval for the dissipation of her emotions. At this juncture, it stands to reason that Elara would be inclined to engage in discourse with her. In any case, the outcome was favorable. The opportunity she afforded Elara, the chance to become a moonlight, was preferable to becoming a Luna of a pack. The Luna invariably had to comply with the directives of her alpha, but a moonlight was capable of compelling even an alpha to acquiesce. A few feet down the hallway, from where Elara and her mother were located, Karen was pacing back and forth in another room. "Please cease movement. You will cause me great mental distress." Karen's mother, Cynthia, expressed her discontent. The inquiry posed sought to ascertain the rationale behind the subject's decision to not retreat to their designated personal quarters. Devon, the subject's father, also made an inquiry. The subject's participation in the preparation of the mother and daughter is hereby requested. The question arises as to why one should remain in such a relationship, given the evident challenges. When only their faces are visible, it elicits a visceral reaction that is akin to physical discomfort, often manifesting as a desire to vomit. Karen articulated his sentiments with a pronounced air of sarcasm, his words tainted with a palpable venom. He was compelled to acknowledge the woman and transform her into a Luna, despite her previous deceptions, including her portrayal of an innocent girl and his rightful mate. In the contemporary era, having achieved her objective, she proceeded to unveil a more authentic aspect of her persona. Her words, her personality, her shyness, and even her clothing had undergone a complete transformation. Her financial management skills were limited to the ability to request additional funds and make purchases. In the end, in an effort to minimize his interactions with her, he provided her with a credit card and attempted to maintain a significant physical distance between them. However, as time progressed, her behavior became increasingly challenging to endure. Having achieved her materialistic aspirations, she now sought his companionship. The subject continued to exhibit behaviors indicative of contentment, including the act of purring in proximity to the male subject. Did she genuinely believe that, subsequent to observing her in person, she remained a viable contender? The infant's imminent arrival was the sole remaining event to be graced by the presence of the mother. According to established norms, the offspring of the alpha would be expected to remain within the confines of the pack, a principle that was particularly stringent in the case of a male offspring. Following the birth of her second child, Elara departure from the subject's life was inevitable, whether through death or other circumstances. Karen, it must be acknowledged that she is your Luna, irrespective of your personal sentiments on the matter. The decision to select her was made by you. It is imperative to acknowledge this fact. She is the future mother of your children. The child's father issued a stern reprimand. Devon was already experiencing a state of emotional distress due to concerns regarding his offspring. He had failed to recognize his own Luna, even though he should have found her at the summer ball before Elara left the pack. At this juncture, the act of lamenting the past was rendered futile. Elara has expressed her desire for Karen to marry her sister. This, in conjunction with the general consensus that the child was destined to become Luna, compelled him to compel his son to undertake the Luna ceremony. Child, not children, only one child. It is implausible that I would ever have another child with her. Karen expressed profound dismay at the prospect of spending another night in the company of Elara. Observe the unfolding events, father. Subsequent to the conclusion of the ball game, I will proceed to the academy to confer with Elara. It is my intention to persuade her to accompany me once more. It is reasonable to hypothesize that the subject has endured a period of suffering due to her absence from me during the previous months. Once reason is applied, the subject will be receptive to returning. Only then will I be able to claim my rightful place in Luna's lineage. Karen continued, his eyes betraying a palpable sense of optimism. The evening of the formal dance event, it is imperative that Karen take hold of her hand. Devon issued a directive to his son. For what purpose should I do so? Karen inquired, his countenance betraying evident discomposure. Given that every couple that enters the ballroom does so. This is one of numerous royal protocols to which I have previously requested your attention and which I encourage you to peruse. It is imperative to note that the protocol manual was not consulted. What if you disrespect His Highness in some way? Devon articulated to his son in a hushed yet assertive manner. I have read it, I have read it. Father, I am aware of the appropriate comportment to adopt in the presence of the king, and I will conduct myself accordingly. Karen dismissed the matter, disregarding its significance. The individual's choice to refer to the figure as the king in a public setting, where it was audible to all present, has led to the emergence of skepticism concerning their reliability. Devon's immediate reaction was one of reprimand. Following a series of reprimands and reminders from his father, Karen eventually held Elara hand, albeit with reluctance. Elara, by this point, was grinding her teeth. It should be noted that this interaction occurred at the onset of the evening's activities. At precisely 8 p.m., as the guests began to arrive, a murmur could be heard emanating from the hallway. This phenomenon was understood to be indicative of the arrival of the king. The remaining individuals in the hallways promptly entered the expansive ballroom. The subject's anticipation of meeting His Highness is palpable. Eara's exclamation was characterized by a high degree of enthusiasm. Karen's silence in response to her affirmation was indicative of his displeasure. His rolling of the eyes and his disgusted expression conveyed his disapproval. All individuals seated are instructed to rise to their feet. The doorman's resonant voice reverberated within the expansive ballroom. Notwithstanding the absence of vocalization on his part, the high-ranking wolves in attendance would have been privy to his message. It was unnecessary for him to reiterate his statement. In the subsequent instant, all parties were in a standing position, their attention fixed on the door. The monarch's tardy arrival was consistent with his customary practice of arriving last, which ensured that all other expected attendees had already convened in the ballroom. The two doormen proceeded to open the double doors, thereby unveiling the king and his partner. In addition to the king's closest associates, the subjects, designated as Beta Orin, Gamma Joshua, Elias, and their respective partners, proceeded in close succession to the leading werewolf, who had been ranked first. It has been announced that His Highness Theron J. Wolf and Miss Elara Quinn, the alpha of this year's Generation Moonlight Pack, will be in attendance. The vast majority of individuals present inclined their heads respectfully, though a faint murmur could still be heard. It is noteworthy that His Highness had never been accompanied by a partner to the ball. The only two individuals who did not respond and bowed were Karen and Elara, as both of them became immobilized upon hearing Elara's name. Fortunately for them, they were positioned in a distant area of the ballroom, situated among other smaller groups. Karen appeared to be in a state of profound awe, while Elara's physical appearance seemed to have undergone an enhancement in comparison to her previous state. In the soft glow of the chandeliers, her demeanor, aesthetic appeal, and overall presentation exuded an unmistakable elegance. The subject's eyes exhibited a combination of longing and love, along with a concomitant state of confusion. The rationale behind Elara's presence at the side of the werewolf king remains a subject of inquiry. The manner in which the king grasped her arm as he entered conveyed a sense of tenderness and consideration towards her. He proceeded at a deliberate pace, taking care to respect the length of her dress, while his eyes remained fixed on her. He would recognize that gaze anywhere, it was the gaze of a man in love. Had it not been for the presence of the king, he would have already decapitated him. Despite his inability to physically engage in combat on behalf of his companion, a deep, low rumble emanated from his larynx. Concurrently, Elara had merely momentarily directed her gaze toward Elara, subsequently shifting her attention to the most aesthetically pleasing male individual she had ever encountered. The aforementioned individual, referred to as His Highness, epitomized the archetypal male figure. By means of rapid, successive eye movements, she focused her attention on both individuals, while maintaining a firmly clenched hand. The tension in her muscles was so great that it was visibly causing the release of blood from the affected area. She had already obtained Elara's mate, and it was expected that she would eventually surpass her. Despite her status as a moonlight and elevated societal rank, Elara was anticipated to prevail in the realm of romance. She had Elara's mate, an alpha of the pack, but the latter now appeared at the arm of the werewolf king. Her eyes expressed profound animosity, yet she remained convinced that Elara's accolade stemmed not from any inherent virtue, but rather from her affiliation with the Moonlight Students, a distinction she held as the inaugural female member of this cohort. "Do not feel anxious. I am here with you." Theron offered Elara a subtle vocal encouragement, perceiving a barely perceptible tremor on his arm. Upon hearing the announcement, she experienced a state of nervousness and proceeded with caution into the ballroom. Due to the recipient's increased sense of ease, which was induced by the donor's considerate actions, she inhaled deeply and nodded in affirmation. "All of you are permitted to raise your heads." Theron issued the order in a firm tone. Subsequently, the numerous alphas, betas, lunas, council members, and other invited guests were compelled to elevate their gazes and observe his partner. A survey of the subject population revealed that a slight majority of individuals cast a glance in order to satisfy their curiosity. In contrast, a smaller but significant minority cast a more intense gaze. It is noteworthy that no subject failed to at least glance at the phenomenon under scrutiny. We cordially invite you to enjoy yourselves this evening and be at ease. Despite the impending discourse on grave matters, this evening's gathering is a manifestation of our profound interconnectedness as a sizable extended family unit. Theron proceeded to extend a greeting to all present before proceeding to his designated table. As the king, his table was situated in an area that was in front of the room. At that very table, his most trusted colleagues were seated as well. Accordingly, those who followed Theron when he entered also took their seats at the table, along with the head councilman and the second-in-command council member. Subsequently, the remaining council members assumed their respective positions. Subsequently, a series of tables were presented, enumerating the members of various packs. The tables indicated that the members of the pack closest to the king's table were considered the most powerful werewolves and the members of the strongest packs. In the periphery of the designated area, positioned at a greater distance from the designated seat of authority, were the less dominant alphas and members of the lesser packs. In a manner consistent with his refined sensibilities, he proceeded to adjust Elara's seat, ensuring her comfort, and subsequently assumed his own seat, taking a seat. "Your Highness, it has been a considerable amount of time since we last encountered each other." The head councilman confirmed this assessment with a subtle expression of approval. "Has it? I do not believe that a significant amount of time has elapsed, Varag." Theron responded in a nonchalant manner. "Indeed, Your Highness. Indeed, I had some pressing matters to address with you, yet I was unable to locate you. Despite arriving at the palace, I was prevented from accessing your private quarters. It should also be noted that I have been unsuccessful in establishing communication with you via telephone. It is imperative to ascertain whether the guards made mention of the visit." The councilman persisted in his inquiries, undeterred by Theron's apparent disinterest. "Is that so, Verac?" Theron posed the question in a manner that appeared to defy his usual composure, yet his voice remained devoid of any emotional expression. "I was not aware of your attempt to visit me. It was my understanding that your visit to the palace was merely a tour, as the guards informed me that you were accompanied. It should be noted that my personal quarters are not accessible to the public for the purpose of sightseeing. In the future, it would be advisable to call in advance if one plans to visit." Theron's response was composed and unemotional, maintaining the same facial expression. The head councilman was perplexed. He endeavored to provoke Theron, but was thwarted in his attempt. Furthermore, he characterized the endeavor to present Martha to him as a sightseeing excursion. At that precise moment, the woman was positioned adjacent to him. It is also important to consider the possibility that she felt disrespected. The councilman gazed at the fair-haired, blue-eyed beauty seated on his right. However, her countenance remained inscrutable, devoid of any discernible emotion except for her evident interest in the king. She exhibited a faint smile. Subsequent to Theron's initial positional establishment, she proceeded to meticulously monitor and record his every movement. She did not exhibit any reaction, nor did she avert her gaze from Elara. Experiencing a sense of relief due to the council members' continued optimism, the individual directed their gaze toward Theron once more. "Your Highness, I implore you to disregard this matter. The responsibility for the incident lay with me. In any case, I would like to introduce to you Miss Martha Johnson. This charming unaccompanied woman has just arrived from England to attend this evening's event. She is currently among the most prominent female werewolves in circulation." The councilman elucidated the matter promptly. He was apprehensive that Theron might disrupt his train of thought. He was also apprehensive about Theron's potential missteps in addressing the lady, which prompted him to emphasize her formidable capabilities. Theron, a figure of authority in the werewolf community, was held in high regard by the subject. Therefore, by providing him with this information, the subject could expect Theron to exercise discretion in his choice of vocabulary. "It is a pleasure to make your presence known once more, Your Highness. I have not had the privilege of meeting Your Highness since that time." A dulcet voice began to utter words. "Is that so? Congratulations, Verac." Theron's interruption prevented Martha from concluding her greeting. He did not even deign to glance in the direction of the beautiful woman. His attention was focused on the individual seated adjacent to him on the left. Observing her with her hands positioned beneath the table, exhibiting slight agitation due to the incessant stares, his heart experienced a profound sense of sorrow. It is possible that she attempted to appear at ease, therefore, she took a glass of wine and was about to drink from it. The individual addressed inquired about the reason for the congratulations, indicating their confusion and surprise at the gesture. The councilman inquired, his brow furrowed in contemplation. He expressed displeasure regarding Theron's apparent indifference towards the woman, despite his own prior disclosures concerning her formidable capabilities. However, he would not presume to reprimand the king, particularly in such a public setting. "Naturally, for your recent romantic interest. At your age, to have managed to charm the young lady is quite an accomplishment. Theron's demeanor exhibited a sense of composure, concurrently extending her hand to grasp Elara's glass, thereby preventing its contact with her lips. "What is the substance of your statement, Your Highness?" "She is not my lover." The councilman's assertion was promptly corroborated. What was the king's rationale? Typically, he would not be so direct in his communication in an official context. Despite the fact that he had previously engaged in the act of introducing women to one another, he did not respond in the manner that he had on this occasion. He would merely lend an ear to these claims and subsequently identify a rationale to rebuff them. Wine is not salutary. The subject has not yet undergone a complete recovery. Here, you will find a glass of strawberry juice. Theron articulated to Elara with a modified tone, as he placed the wine glass on the table and substituted it with a juice-filled glass. In response, she merely nodded her head in affirmation. She perceived that she had unintentionally intruded upon a dialogue between the two men. Upon receiving the glass, she consumed a few sips of the liquid. The juice was characterized by a notable sweetness and a pleasant taste. The subject expressed significant preference for the dish, citing its incorporation of preferred fruits as a primary factor in its appeal. It appears that she is not your romantic partner. However, at this particular table, only those who are working together are permitted to sit with us. If she is not your date, then why is she seated with us? Theron's voice took on a stern tone as he inquired. Upon hearing the word date, Elara experienced a sudden coughing fit, having momentarily choked on her beverage. Theron promptly observed her and, with the same warm tone he had previously employed when she had choked, gently reprimanded her. It is imperative to consume alcohol in a measured manner. It is highly improbable that this object will be stolen from you. She nodded in agreement once more and, taking the napkin from his hand, delicately patted her lips to prevent the lipstick from smearing. It is evident that her status as the granddaughter of Councilman Merrick has prompted certain assumptions, which I have taken into consideration. The councilman stated. The subject was perturbed by the manner in which Theron was manipulating him, yet concurrently, his emotional state was characterized by a sense of elation. He was intrigued by the apparent attentiveness he exhibited towards a woman, even if she was not the one he was attempting to introduce. If she is indeed Merrick Johnson's granddaughter, why is she not occupying a seat at his table? The speaker then addressed a second individual, whom they referred to as Verac. Theron inquired, finally directing his gaze toward the elder. The councilman was attempting to articulate his thoughts when Martha assumed the role of primary responder, addressing Theron's inquiries. "I apologize, Your Highness. It is imperative to refrain from expressing displeasure towards Councilman Albert. It is acknowledged that the decision to be present at this event was made under the influence of personal inclination. However, it is asserted that no intention of causing disrespect was harbored. I am available to depart at this time, should you wish for me to do so." Martha promptly offered an apology. Her blue eyes expressed concern. In an effort to demonstrate her sincerity, she was on the verge of rising to her feet and departing. Typically, observing a woman in such a state of agitation due to the actions of another would prompt any man to intercede and advise her against her departure. Theron's actions, while not typical of a typical man, exhibited a notable lack of gentility towards women. Elara had anticipated that he would assist the lady and impede her departure, however, he remained silent. Despite his previous courteous demeanor towards her, he had not cast a single glance in her direction. This event instigated a nascent sense of uncertainty regarding his intentions towards her. "Lady Martha, your departure is unnecessary. If I affirm that you are to be my escort this evening, it will suffice." "Your Highness?" The councilman, Albert, intervened. He was content that Theron was finally showing interest in someone, but he still had to ascertain that the king truly liked Elara and had romantic intentions towards her. Consequently, he found himself unable to relinquish his hold on Lady Martha. The woman had not committed any transgressions up to that point, and as such, she should be granted an opportunity to demonstrate her innocence. She was also the prime candidate he had chosen from among many others, and an heir born from her would be as strong as one born from Elara. Therefore, he prevented her from leaving. It should be noted that the subject could be utilized to assess Elara's sentiments toward the monarch. The emotions experienced by Lady Martha were discernible, while Elara's countenance, regrettably, mirrored that of the king, lacking any discernible expression. Theron exhibited certain indications through his actions, albeit inconsistently. However, he could not discern such indications from her. Theron refrained from commenting on the statements made by Councilman Albert, which resulted in Lady Martha maintaining her position at the same table as them. During the initial phase of the evening, Elara had the opportunity to greet and be introduced to numerous dominant alphas. Her presence at the royal table ensured her inclusion in the discourse occurring during each instance in which an individual approached the king for a greeting. Her status as an alpha within a pack of watchers engendered a sense of deference from the other alphas. It is conceivable that, in the future, she may become a visitor to their pack. By fostering amicable relations at this juncture, she may be able to mitigate the severity of any subsequent legal proceedings, should they arise. Moreover, she was held in high esteem due to her association with the king, a figure renowned for his appreciation of strength. While some might have suspected a more profound connection between the two, most were convinced that she came as the king's partner because she was the first female moonlight. The prevailing sentiment was not that she was unsuitable for him, rather, the majority of Alpha and Luna pairs at the ball considered them to be a perfect match. The two subjects were observed to be in close proximity and appeared to be engaged in a mutually beneficial relationship. The issue at hand pertained to the king, who, at the age of 100 years, had never engaged in romantic relationships. It is possible that the subjects had become habituated to his solitary presence. "Elara, I believe it would be beneficial for your parents to be present at this evening's event. Would you like to meet them?" Theron inquired in close proximity to her ear during a brief lull in activity. Upon hearing the mention of her parents, she exhibited a physical reaction characterized by a sudden startle response. She was cognizant of the necessity to meet with them, however, she experienced a reluctance to do so at that particular moment. Initially, she had intended to visit their dormitory briefly, with the sole purpose of rebuffing Karen and promptly departing. Fortunately, she did not observe them during the initial portion of the evening, primarily due to their location at a considerable distance. Secondly, by utilizing her lycanthropic perception, she possessed the capacity to discern their presence if she endeavored to do so. However, she did not seek to do so. In the presence of the king, she was obliged to comport herself in a civilized manner and to treat them as her parents. She was not inclined to air personal grievances in a public forum, therefore, she would be obliged to maintain a courteous demeanor toward them. This prompts the question of whether her actions would result in the same exploitation from the same individual. It is plausible that the aforementioned individual would be utilized as a means to gain proximity to His Highness. Previously, she would have rejected the offer, however, she had since become aware of the situation. Fortunately, it appeared that they still possessed the decency to at least show respect for the king. They had previously attended balls and were therefore aware of the royal protocols, including the one that stipulated the necessity of an invitation to be present at the king's table. It has been demonstrated that only strong alphas who have demonstrated a history of leading packs for an extended period and have a documented previous connection to the king are granted proximity to the table, contingent upon the king's express authorization. The subject's parents exhibited behaviors consistent with the beta archetype, suggesting a potential for familial influence. However, if they asserted that their purpose was to meet their daughter, the situation would be quite different. "No, I do not wish to convene with them at this time, Your Highness. I am grateful for your inquiry. I will do so in a private setting later on." Elara's response was one of gratitude. Theron's subtle gesture of acknowledgement did not entail an insistence on the matter. The subject was unaware of the nature of Elara's relationship with her family. However, a close observation of her eyes revealed a clear reluctance to meet her parents. "In the event that a change of mind occurs, please notify me at your earliest convenience." Theron made a brief statement, then resumed her conversation with another alpha. Shortly after the inquiry was posed, an individual lacking the appropriate credentials and seemingly unaware of the established royal protocols arrived. "Sister?" From a considerable distance, a voice of a high, effeminate timbre called out, causing Elara to frown. It is evident that she should have been cognizant of the fact that, despite her parents' continued consideration for the location, there was an individual who did not share this sentiment. She oriented her gaze toward the direction of the voice in order to formulate a response. She was aware that, regardless of her decision to disregard Elara, the latter would still proceed toward the table. As anticipated, she did not respond when her younger sister was approaching. Furthermore, she feigned having only recently noticed Elara and thus approached her, conveniently disregarding the established protocols. "My apologies. I kindly request your indulgence for this intrusion. The joy experienced upon reuniting with my sister was so profound that the details of time and location became obscured. My name is Elara Quinn, the Luna of Silverhold Pack, and I am the younger sister of Elara." Liara's countenance exhibited a reddish hue, suggesting a state of agitation. She promptly offered a courteous salutation. Even Elara would have been proud of the exceptional welcome her younger sister extended, had she been aware of Liara's full capabilities. However, at this juncture, Elara's perception of the young girl had evolved into that of a mature woman. The woman in question was not content to merely acquiesce to external pressures and societal norms, rather, she exhibited a clear sense of self-determination and a strong ability to articulate her desires. In summary, she successfully introduced herself to the king in a manner that was both innocent and coincidental. She informed those present that she was the sister of Moonlight and that she, Elara, was also the Luna of a pack. Theron's gaze shifted from Elara to the individual positioned before their table. The diminutive blonde individual exhibited a posture of profound reverence, her body inclined in a state of worshipful contemplation. He refrained from verbal communication with her, instead gesturing for her to rise. Elara advanced toward the table with alacrity, having procured the necessary authorization. Her sense of self-satisfaction was palpable as she traversed the distance. She then waited for several seconds, anticipating a verbal response from the individual referred to as His Highness, but this expectation was not met. Neither he nor any other person at the table offered any verbal communication. Elara remained silent, contemplating the implications of the situation before offering her perspective. She reasoned that if Elara possessed the audacity to engage in a game of sisterly affection, she too should engage in it independently. Due to the fact that all of the high-ranking wolves were paying close attention to her, she felt intimidated and therefore spoke again promptly. "Sister, your absence has been deeply felt. I was unaware of your intention to participate in this ball, and I inquire as to whether your purpose was to create an element of surprise. Consequently, I was genuinely taken aback. It has been several months since you have contacted your family. We were deeply concerned about you. Given your attendance at the academy, it is surprising that you have not yet contacted us." Elara paused momentarily, as if experiencing a physical impediment to breathing, due to the profound emotional impact of the moment. Thereafter, she proceeded with her discourse. "I am aware that your primary concern has always been the fulfillment of your aspirations, even to the extent of departing prior to my Luna ceremony. However, I respectfully request that you maintain communication with us periodically during your leisure time." Elara expressed her sentiments with a countenance that betrayed a certain poignant emotion, her eyes brimming with tears. As was customary, Elara was intent on gaining the upper hand. If she were to present herself as a victim initially, regardless of Elara's subsequent remarks, it would appear to be in poor taste. This would lead others to perceive her actions as a form of rationalization. Elara endeavored to inform the group that her sister's demeanor and actions were not indicative of the persona she had portrayed, as she had managed to conceal her involvement from her family members. Elara maintained her stoic demeanor, yet internally she perceived an enhancement in Elara's performance during the period she was not observing her. In either case, the subject did not demonstrate any signs of being perturbed or upset in response to Elara's discourse. Elara's countenance bore a faint, frigid smile, devoid of any emotional warmth, as she prepared to respond to her sister's remarks. However, Elias interjected, usurping the opportunity to speak. "To what extent were you concerned about your sister's well-being?" he inquired, expressing astonishment. He was her instructor and was, in conjunction with her pack members, present each day at the academy with Elara. He had never observed her receive any telephone calls from her excessively concerned family members. It could be argued that, given Elias's frequent presence among the students during class periods, she lacked awareness of whether she received phone calls during instructional breaks. However, Elara had sustained injuries and was in a comatose state for an extended period. In the event that the exercise time was included in the calculation, it can be deduced that her family had not contacted her for a period exceeding 3 weeks. In the context of interpersonal relationships, a logical expectation is that individuals who are genuinely concerned about another person would initiate communication. Additionally, he had received some information from Jackson regarding Elara's strained relationship with her family, which he had considered when deliberating whether to inform her family about her injuries. Although Jackson had not explicitly articulated his sentiments, and Elara had refrained from disclosing any negative information regarding her family, the ambience of unease was palpable. Jackson informed him that she had concluded her vacation on the same day that she returned home, despite her previous enthusiasm for re-establishing her position within her pack's territory. Consequently, one could infer that the aforementioned conclusion is valid. In the event that the aforementioned reasons were insufficient, the subsequent rationale provided by Elias to Elara served as a sufficient explanation, as he persisted in his discourse, failing to allow her to respond to the initial inquiry. Have there been any fluctuations in the intensity of your concerns for your sister since she departed from the family home and up to the present moment? Elias inquired with a touch of mystery. Elara's countenance darkened in response to the unidentified individual's interference, yet she recognized that within the royal chamber, only distinguished officials were present. Consequently, she felt unable to inquire about the rationale behind the man's actions. She was able to continue her performance. Naturally, we experienced a daily sense of concern during the period in which we did not receive communication from her. It is imperative to recognize that the extent to which we prioritize or neglect our concerns on any given day is a subjective matter. We are the subject's family. Since her departure from her place of residence, we have been concerned. The issue at hand is simply that we were unaware of a suitable time to contact her. We requested that she call us at her earliest convenience, but she did not comply. However, it is plausible that she is acquiring a substantial amount of knowledge at the academy, which would justify her absence. Elara's response was affirmative and accompanied by a smile. She posited that this was the crux of the man's argument, emphasizing the absence of a self-designation. Consequently, she initiated the disclosure. Indeed, your capacity for understanding is quite commendable. Elias concurred, also smiling like her. Nevertheless, it would be reasonable to hypothesize that, as a Luna and a high-ranking werewolf, you experienced a sense of disquiet regarding the bond you shared with your older sister following her attack and subsequent hospitalization. Therefore, it was known with certainty that during that period of time, Elara would not be engaged in academic pursuits. Consequently, there was no necessity to concern oneself with disturbing her classes, given her lack of participation in any such activities. Nevertheless, anticipation persisted for her independent initiative to establish communication. It is conceivable that she could have summoned assistance in her unconscious state, had she exerted a greater degree of effort. The recipient's actions and sentiments demonstrate a genuine affection for her sister. This is a commendable feat. Elias articulated a sarcastic remark, maintaining a countenance of bemusement. Vera exhaled audibly in response to her partner's intervention. The man exhibited a propensity to become agitated when confronted with individuals characterized by duplicity and perfidy. The assertion was indeed valid, and thus, it merited acknowledgement. Internally, she expressed her agreement by clapping. It is evident that the other individuals present would not feel at ease offering their opinions in the presence of the king. Elara experienced a state of paralysis, unable to formulate a response. Her sister sustained an injury, yet the family unit as a whole did not perceive it. The bond among them had been weakened by the events that transpired at the Luna ceremony, rendering them collectively unresponsive to the attack. Lucien, who had maintained proximity to Elara, had not yet undergone the shift, thereby precluding the capacity to perceive the bond. Her response, in which she indicated that she worried about both issues equally on a daily basis, was an erroneous approach. Her choice of words was regrettable. At this juncture, Theron remained silent, and Elara maintained her customary inscrutable demeanor. It is evident that the discourse was not centered on her. Elara experienced a sense of internal distress, characterized by a sense of being overwhelmed by the prospect of articulating her thoughts and feelings. This emotional state induced a physical discomfort, manifesting as a slight stomach ache. This activity facilitated her mental clarity. "Has my sister sustained an injury?" the woman inquired, her brow furrowed, as she placed a hand on her prominently distended abdomen. Additionally, she exhibited a slight flexion, suggesting the presence of discomfort. Elara exhaled audibly, expressing a certain degree of uncertainty regarding the extent of her sister's physical discomfort. However, it was important to note that her actions were never directed towards causing harm to a minor. She closed her eyes and opened them again, and finally spoke. "Your Highness, my sister is currently experiencing health issues. Is it permissible to escort her to the restroom and perform a welfare check?" Elara inquired of Theron with deference. "Affirmative. It is imperative that you attend to her immediately." Theron addressed her with a gentle tone, but his countenance did not convey any concern for the other individual. He had not regarded Elara since she permitted him to raise her head. In response, he promptly rose to his feet and extended his arm to assist her in rising. Elara expressed her gratitude and then took her leave from the table, proceeding in the direction of her sister. She gently grasped her hand and guided her to the restroom. The subjects did not utter a word as they walked. Elara's profound sense of disdain for Elara rendered her unable to engage in verbal communication with her. Upon arriving at the bathroom, she merely instructed a passing maid to inform Myrna to come and assist Elara, and then promptly departed. Elara also remained silent and did not glance behind her as Elara walked away. She expressed frustration at the deviation from her initial expectations. It appeared that the utilization of an alternative approach was imperative. Upon entering the ballroom, Elara encountered Martha. She offered a sincere apology and made a slight bow, thereby creating an opening for the latter to pass through the door. Martha passed away without expressing gratitude, proceeding with a sense of assurance. Elara did not concern herself with such trivial matters, therefore, she did not take notice and proceeded towards the ballroom. "Are you familiar with the event referred to as Battle Royale, Miss Alpha?" The inquiry was posed to Martha, whose voice was characterized by a high, screeching tone. The voice exhibited a marked difference from the one she had previously used when addressing His Highness. This auditory phenomenon was reminiscent of a voice Elara had previously encountered. It has been demonstrated that her sister exhibited a similar alteration in the tonality of her voice. Her disposition shifted rapidly, oscillating between amiability and acrimony, depending on her interlocutor and the nature of her request. This particular trait had initially been perceived as endearing during her youth, as it was exhibited by her sister. However, as she grew older, it began to be a source of considerable irritation, as it appeared to render her vulnerable to mockery. The response was affirmative. Elara's response was delivered as she pivoted and directed her gaze toward Martha. Martha's flinching was minimal, but it occurred when Elara's eyes conveyed an unwavering look and when Martha sensed a hint of aura from Elara. Nevertheless, she remained steadfast in her position. She had invested a considerable amount of effort and resources into her transformation into an individual deemed worthy of assuming the role of queen among werewolves. A minor altercation, following a protracted journey along a well-trodden path, proved inconsequential. Are you aware of the implications of this phenomenon? Martha was queried once more, her countenance betraying a subtle smile. It would be appreciated if you could provide a rationale for the decision to prevent my departure. Elara articulated a sense of resignation with a sigh. While she was reluctant to appear discourteous, her direct nature was evident. Her approach to verbal communication was not characterized by circuitous rhetoric. I will, Miss Alpha. I wanted to ensure that you were aware of this event, and I would like to extend an invitation for you to participate in the Battle Royale event with me this evening. Martha articulated her assertions with a pronounced confidence, folding her arms in front of her chest to accentuate her point. It appeared as though she was offering Elara an opportunity to make Martha herself shine. Elara's academic pursuits at the academy encompassed both history and general knowledge. Despite her familiarity with the historical conflict in question, she found herself perplexed by Martha's decision to make her the opponent. The Battle Royale was a ritualized confrontation that transpired at the culmination of each annual cycle. In this contest, a solitary werewolf had the opportunity to compete against the reigning monarch for the throne. However, as the discrepancy in their rankings grew, the determination to prevail became futile. The disparity in the first rank of the king was approximately 100 times greater than that of the second rank. It is difficult to fathom why any werewolf would elect to expend their lives in a futile attempt to usurp the throne, given that a considerable number of werewolves, possibly numbering in the hundreds, were required to vanquish the king. However, as a result of historical developments, it underwent a gradual transformation, acquiring a new function. In contemporary times, the Battle Royale has been observed to occur at the behest of two werewolves, with the victor being bestowed with a wish granted by the king. It is important to note that specific conditions were in place to ensure the equitable administration of the process. The initial condition stipulated that the competitors must possess equivalent rankings, however, their sub-rankings could vary. The second condition imposed constraints on the scope of their aspirations. The subjects were not permitted to petition the king to mete out punishment or death, nor could they request the bestowal of official titles. This stipulation signified that the wish must be deemed reasonable by the relevant authorities. The third condition stipulated that the wish should be mutually inclusive, requiring both opponents to express a shared desire. Regardless of the victor, the wish would remain constant, therefore, it was imperative that a consensus be reached in advance. The fourth stipulation was that the duel could not result in a fatality. In the event that the opponent, who was on the verge of being defeated, chose to relinquish their position, the victor would exercise restraint, thereby bringing the contest to a conclusion. It is with great regret that I must inform you of my lack of interest in the matter at hand. In response, Elara articulated her perspective with composure. She was reluctant to create a spectacle or to solicit anything from the king. The rationale behind her compliance with Martha remains unclear. It was hypothesized that the subject would be approached voluntarily, however, it was determined that the subject believed they had an advantage, and therefore, they were reluctant to relinquish it. Despite the reluctance to engage, participation is inevitable. Martha articulated her perspective with a sense of assurance, accompanied by a subtle expression of self-satisfaction. It is reasonable to hypothesize that one would be incapable of compelling another to do something against their will. Elara maintained an unruffled composure and indicated her desire to disengage from the situation by walking away. She had grown weary of such individuals as Martha and her sister, consequently, she was reluctant to contemplate the nature of the advantage she was alluding to. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.